You're standing on top of the world. The sky above you is black and endless, the air so thin it cuts your lungs like glass. You've trained for years, sacrificed everything, and now, finally, you're standing on Mount Everest's summit. But what if I told you? At that very moment you were already dead. You just didn't know it yet. In May 2019, a British climber named Robin Haynes Fisher reached that very peak, the one he dreamed of his entire life. He should have been celebrating. Instead, his final moments were already counting down, hidden in the chaos that was about to unfold beneath him. He had warned everyone, overcrowding will be fatal. And he was right. Just hours after standing at the top of the world, Robin's body would collapse into the ice, surrounded by dozens of other climbers trapped in what became one of the deadliest traffic jams in Everest's history. Tonight we climb into that story, step by step, breath by dying breath, to uncover how a man who foresaw his own death still walked straight into it. This is the story of Robin Haynes Fisher. And if you've ever wondered how the world's highest mountain quietly turns dreams into death, stay with us. Because here, on Ben Stories, every climb has a cost, and every story, a ghost. For Robin Haynes Fisher, Everest wasn't a whim, it was a lifelong obsession. He wasn't one of those adrenaline-chasing tourists who paid a fortune for a selfie at the summit. No, Robin was meticulous, thoughtful, a man who respected the mountain. He spent years preparing, running marathons, climbing peaks across the Andes and the Alps, training his body to survive where the air holds less oxygen than a dying candle flame. Friends remembered how he'd spend hours studying weather patterns, reading expedition reports, memorizing every route, every death. He knew what Everest could do, and maybe that was what drew him closer. By May 2019, Everest's south route had become a highway, packed with hundreds of climbers all chasing the same photo, all chasing the same dream. It wasn't the Everest of legends anymore. It was a queue, a deadly human line stretching toward the sky. That spring was especially brutal. The weather window, the few days when the jet stream calms long enough for a safe summit, had shrunk to just a handful of hours. Every expedition, every climber, every ambition was forced into that narrow gap. Hundreds of people. One path. No margin for error. Robin knew what that meant. Days before his climb, he posted something chilling on Instagram. Too many people on the mountain. It's dangerous. It could prove fatal. He wasn't being dramatic. He was being prophetic. May 25th. The air was razor thin, and the sun cut across the South Col like fire on snow. Robin and his Sherpa team pushed toward the summit through an endless line of climbers, a queue that barely moved, where every extra minute cost oxygen, warmth, and life. They climbed through exhaustion, frostbite, and silence. Every breath burned, every step felt like dragging your own body to its limit. Finally, sometime after sunrise, Robin reached the top. 8,048 meters. He looked out over the world, a white ocean of clouds, endless, perfect. He had done it. But at that moment, standing in the place most people only dream of, Robin didn't celebrate. He didn't shout. He didn't even smile. Because even at the summit he saw what was coming. A bottleneck below, a line of climbers frozen in place, hundreds of meters of vertical death between him and safety. And as he began his descent, the dream started to crumble. He was running out of oxygen. The line was barely moving. The weather was turning. Everest was closing her grip. He didn't know it yet, but his warning had already come true. The death zone, that's what climbers call the space above 8,000 meters. It's where the human body starts to shut down, no matter how strong or prepared you are. Cells die. The brain slows. Decision-making turns to fog. And the cruel truth? Every second you spend up there, you're dying. Slowly, silently. Robin was now inside that invisible graveyard. His oxygen was running low, and the line of climbers ahead of him stretched endlessly down the ridge. Some were moving. Most weren't. People slumped over their poles, faces hidden behind frozen masks, bodies trembling in the wind like broken marionettes. "Keep moving," his Sherpa urged. "Slow, steady." But how do you move when there's nowhere to go? Above them, the sky was blindingly blue, the kind of beauty that mocks you when you fighting to breathe. Below, a sea of climbers jammed the path. The Hillary Step, a narrow rock face just below the summit, had become a choke point, forcing dozens to wait in single file. Every minute spent standing still meant losing oxygen, losing heat, losing hope. Robin tried to stay calm. He checked his gauge. The needle was sinking fast. He knew the math. He'd studied it. You don't survive long in the death zone without oxygen, and you definitely don't survive if you stop moving. Hours passed. The wind picked up. The line inched forward. One step, then another. A climber ahead collapsed. No one could help. They couldn't even bend down without risking their own lives. On Everest, compassion dies before you do. By the time Robin reached the balcony, a small ledge on the descent route, his body was shaking uncontrollably. He swapped oxygen bottles, but something was wrong. The flow was weak, sputtering. His Sherpa checked it. Frostbite had frozen part of the valve. Robin took a shallow breath, then another. He could feel his lungs fighting for scraps of air. He looked around. Endless white silent bodies. A slow-motion tragedy unfolding all around him. This was what he'd warned the world about. And now, he was living his own prophecy. Somewhere below, radio chatter crackled, climbers running out of oxygen, guides begging for help, teams trapped above 8,000 meters. The mountain was consuming them one by one. Robin pushed onward, down toward the South Col toward safety, but his steps were faltering, his vision dimming. He wasn't thinking about summits anymore. He was thinking about survival, and whether he'd make it before the light inside him went out. And then, somewhere on that endless slope, surrounded by the highest silence on Earth, he stopped. At first, no one noticed that Robin had stopped moving. On Everest, climbers pass like ghosts, each locked in their own private war against the mountain. You glance at the person ahead of you, make sure they're still upright, and keep going. That's how you survive. You don't look back. Robin knelt in the snow, his gloved hand gripping his ice axe. He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't obey. The world was spinning. Sky and snow, light and shadow merging into one. He gasped for air, but the oxygen bottle hissed dry. Every breath was thinner than the last. His Sherpa turned, shouting his name through the wind. "Robin! Robin! Move!" No response. When the Sherpa reached him, Robin was on his knees, his eyes glassy behind frozen goggles. He tried to say something, a whisper lost in the wind. Then he slumped forward, his body folding like paper under the weight of the mountain. The Sherpa checked his pulse. Nothing. A few climbers nearby slowed, stared, then kept walking. It's not cruelty. It's survival. In the death zone, you can't carry a man who's fallen. You can only leave him behind. The Sherpa stayed for a minute longer, hoping for a miracle, before he, too, had to move on. He placed Robin's ice axe upright in the snow beside him, a silent marker of where a dream had ended. And then, he disappeared into the storm of climbers descending below. As the hours passed, the line thinned. Bodies littered the route, some seated upright, some sprawled face down in the ice. Everest looked peaceful again, indifferent, beautiful, deadly. News of Robin's death spread quickly. Down at base camp, his teammates listened to the radio in silence. One of them whispered, "He knew this would happen." Another said nothing, just stared toward the summit, a place now holding one more soul. By the next morning, Robin's body was still there, frozen, motionless, gazing forever toward the sky. The same sky he had dreamed of touching since he was a boy. The irony was unbearable. He had warned the world that overcrowding would kill, and it had taken him first. And as the mountain wind swept over him, carrying whispers of prayer and regret, Everest stood silent, as she always does, indifferent to those who dare to climb her back. Because on this mountain even the wise die the same as the foolish, and sometimes the ones who see death coming are the first to meet it. When word reached the world below, it hit like an echo from the clouds. British climber dies on descent from Mount Everest. Just another headline in a season already soaked in tragedy. But this one carried something different, a haunting familiarity, because Robin Haynes Fisher had predicted his own death. Days earlier, he'd posted the warning that would become his final epitaph. Too many people on the mountain. It's dangerous. It could prove fatal. And now, his words were being replayed across every news outlet, every climbing forum, every living room where people stared at that single, frozen photograph, the one showing a human traffic jam stretching toward the heavens, hundreds of climbers standing shoulder to shoulder at 8,800 meters, trapped between ambition and annihilation. That image became the face of Everest's dark side. In Kathmandu, officials blamed unprecedented demand. Guides blamed inexperienced climbers. Climbers blamed the system, and the greed that turned the world's highest peak into a marketplace for death. But beneath all the arguments, there was a deeper truth. Everest had become something it was never meant to be, a place where people buy their dreams, even if it costs them their lives. Friends of Robin described him as kind, methodical, full of life. He wasn't chasing fame, he wasn't looking for glory. He climbed because the mountains made him feel small, and in that smallness, he felt something like peace. But Everest doesn't care who you are. The mountain never does. Days after his death, his body was left where it fell. Too high, too dangerous to retrieve. Only the wind moved around him, sculpting his final resting place into the ice. He joined a silent company of more than 300 others who never made it home. Climbers who remained forever entombed in the mountain they loved. Back home in the UK, his family received the news with the same disbelief every family feels when the call comes. He had made it to the top, they said. He achieved his dream. But in truth, he had crossed an invisible line. From dream to nightmare. From life to legend. The story spread far beyond the climbing world. People started asking questions no one had dared to before. Why do we still climb this mountain? What is it about Everest that makes people trade their lives for a photograph? And why, after all these deaths, do we still call it a triumph to reach the top, but not a tragedy to never come back down? The answers aren't simple. Maybe they never will be. Because in every climber's heart lies the same whisper that led Robin upward. If I can just reach the top, maybe I'll finally understand. But on Everest, the higher you go, the less there is to understand, and the closer you come to silence. Weeks later, the jet stream returned, sweeping snow across the South Col, covering footprints, tents, and frozen dreams. The season was over. The mountain, cleansed again by wind and ice, waited for the next wave of believers. But Robin's story refused to fade. In the small town he once called home, people gathered to remember him, not as the man who died on Everest, but as the man who understood Everest. He saw the danger coming, not just for himself, but for everyone who followed. And in a way, his final act wasn't a failure. It was a warning, written in ice and silence for the rest of us to read. Climbers who survived that season said they still think about him. They remember the line of bodies, the eerie stillness, the truth that hung in the thin air. Sometimes it's not the mountain that kills you. It's the crowd. And maybe that's the cruelest part. Robin didn't die because he was reckless. He died because too many others were. The next year, new rules came. Fewer permits, stricter checks. Officials said his death changed how Everest would be climbed. But every May, when the weather clears and the dreamers return, the line still forms. Boots to boots, mask to mask, chasing the same deadly horizon. Somewhere up there above the clouds, Robin Haynes Fisher remains, another soul stitched into Everest's frozen memory. He never got his victory photo, never saw the world celebrate his summit. But his story became something more enduring, a mirror for every climber who dares to ask, not can I reach the top, but should I? As the camera fades over the icy ridges, imagine the silence up there, the wind whispering through old ropes and prayer flags, the mountain keeping its secrets. And remember this, every climber who steps into the death zone walks in the shadow of those who never came back, men like Robin who warned the world and paid the price for being right. If this story moved you, don't let it vanish like breath in thin air. Subscribe to Ben's Stories, where the mountain still speaks and where every tale from the edge reminds us how fragile, and how fearless the human spirit can be.